Whoever, whenever, wherever. It's the theme that you have chosen for your conference, and it's very direct and it's very clear, and it provides a call to focus on the great need that exists for the gospel in our neighborhoods and across the nations. But this morning I want to answer the question, why? Whoever, wherever, whenever, why? I believe the answer to that question can be found in the first chapter of Paul's letter to the church in Rome. And you know this chapter contains one of the great statements about preaching the gospel. Paul said, I am not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation unto everyone that believeth. But as great as those words are, and as powerful as that statement is, they do not answer the question, why? The most important thought you will ever think is what you think about when you think about God. The most important thought you will ever think is what you think about when you think about God. The answer to the question, why, is this: whoever, whenever, wherever, because people around the globe need to learn to think rightly about God. The Bible is not teaching us that we are okay. The Bible is not teaching us that people are inherently good. The Bible is not teaching us that people are born in a neutral position toward God. The Bible is teaching us that it is in our very nature to be against God. The Bible is teaching us that people will hold the truth in verse number 18, but we have to stop and ask the question, what truth is this referring to? Well, the truth that God exists, according to what comes after that, the truth that there is an all-powerful, all-good, all-wise, ever-present, all-knowing, eternal Creator who made man in His own image. The Bible tells us that God has not hidden His existence from people. Instead, He made His very existence very clear to us. And how has He been made clear to humanity? Well, verse number 19 tells us that God has shown it to them. In verse number 20, we read, for the invisible things of Him from the creation of the world are clearly seen. The word clearly means that people continually perceive the reality of God by looking at everything that He has created around them. And so the created order, it reveals God in much the same way. A painting tells us that there was a painter. A statue tells us that there was a sculptor. A song tells us that there was a composer. Or a building tells us that there was a builder. The created order screams to all people, everywhere, that there is a God. And the creation speaks so loudly that it effectively strips away any excuse that a person could use to plead ignorance concerning the existence of God. The last phrase of verse number 20, if you want to look at it or highlight it, it is a legal phrase. They are without excuse. It implies that all people in every nation are stripped away of any defense that could possibly be offered for their rejection of God. In other words, it is not possible for anyone, anywhere in the world, at any time, to stand before God and honestly proclaim, I did not know that you exist. No one can plead ignorance. The creation, the created order ensures that that defense is completely taken away. And so the truth of God's existence is the truth that humans will, as Paul writes here, hold. Now, the word hold does not mean to grasp or to carry or to support with your arms or your hands. It's not referring to someone lovingly holding a child. The word means to suppress. It means to stifle. It means to hold down with force against something that is exercising a counter force. So if you would imagine with me for just a moment, I had a large metal spring up here, a large steel spring. And suppose it was on the ground and I would have to put all of my weight and all of my strength. I would have to exert great force to suppress or to push that spring down. But that spring would be fighting against me because it wants to go into its natural position. And because of the tension, if I let up even for a second, it springs back up. This is what people do according to what Paul says here when it comes to the truth about God. Yes, the creation makes His presence and His existence clear to anyone and everyone who is observing it. But what they do is they take that which is clear and in their sinfulness, they begin to suppress that knowledge. They use every bit of energy and every bit of force to try to suppress the reality of His existence. And this is the default position of people. Think back to the Garden of Eden. After Adam and Eve rebelled against God and sinned, God came down to walk with them as He was accustomed to during the cool of the day. And instead of Adam and Eve going then to greet God and looking forward to spending time with Him, the Bible says that they did what? They ran and they hid from Him because they were afraid of Him. See, sin changed man's default position towards God. When Isaiah saw the vision of the Holy One high and lifted up in the temple, what did he do? He hid his face from Him and he cried out, "Woe is me, I am undone, I am ruined, because I've seen the Holy One." Then when Jesus was standing on the shore, you remember this from the Gospels, when Jesus is standing on the shore and Peter is coming in after a long night of fishing and they didn't really catch anything, and Jesus calls out to Peter and He says, "Throw your nets on the other side of the boat." Peter, being an experienced fisherman, sees this man standing here, doesn't know necessarily his background, and what does Peter do? He complies, I think reluctantly, and he throws the nets on the other side of the boat. And before he knew it, there were so many fish in the nets that it began to drag the boat under the waves. Peter got out of the boat and he walked up to Jesus. And what did Peter tell him? He said, "I am a sinful man, depart from me." In other words, Jesus, your presence is making me very uncomfortable. Please go. See, the default position of people is to run from God, not to God, to deny Him, not to embrace Him. And so according to verse number 18, that suppression, it makes God angry. The word wrath in verse number 18 conveys a very intense, ongoing anger that is caused by this continual rejection of the Creator by the creation. In other words, God is furious because people do not think rightly about Him. The results of not thinking rightly about God, as given to us in this text, are nothing short of disastrous. If you look at it, you see that suppressing God impacts worship. Anyone who goes to any foreign land understands that people all over the globe worship many different gods. Animism, Hinduism, Confucianism, Buddhism, Sikhism, Islam, ancestor worship. These are only a few of the world religions that worship gods conceived by the human creative process. And the reality is, people will make a god out of almost anything. I believe it was John Calvin who is credited for saying that the human heart is an idol-making factory.